Welcome, everyone. Welcome. My name is Reverend Sarah Bowen, and I am one of the founding members of the Compassion Consortium, and we are so glad that you're all here today. If you haven't been at an event with us before, I'm just going to take a moment or two to tell you about the Compassion Consortium, and then we'll get started. So we are a non-sectarian and interfaith religious center. We offer spiritual guidance, support, and fellowship to vegans, vegetarians, animal rights activists, animal lovers, and all humans who care about and advocate for the planet. The Compassion Consortium is interfaith, interspiritual, and interspecies. And just to unpack those for you for a moment, interfaith, we mean that we acknowledge the value in all religions, spiritual paths, and wisdom traditions. Interspiritual, we mean we recognize common values within those of peace, compassionate service, and love for all creation. And interspecies, we signify that we are deeply interested in how these values relate to all species, human animals, other than human animals, plant life, the planet as a whole. So that's a little bit about what we're about. You can also see on our website our tenets of agreement, which will tell you more about where we're coming from and our purpose. We host on the fourth Sunday of every month at 4 Eastern Time, a Sunday service. The services are always a little different, but they always include some food for thought, some interspecies spiritual practices, a guest interview, a look at compassion in action, prayers and blessings for joys, and challenges for all of the beings in our lives. We also have other events and interest groups and classes and services like the one that you're attending tonight. So later I will put our website link in the chat for you, compassionconsortium.org, and you can find out more. We are based in New York, although right now, like everyone, we are based on Zoom. At the end of tonight's event, I will be sharing a little information. If you want to come and get to know us and to practice with us, we'll be in an event in the fall at Unity Village. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. And now, I feel like I should have a drum roll. And now a little bit about tonight's event. So we are joined by Bob Isaacson of Dharma Voices for Animals, and we'll be discussing DVA's film, Animals and the Buddha. And so, as I mentioned, we're interfaith, interspecies, interspiritual. And so we like to have people who are deeply rooted in their tradition come and talk to us. For some people who come to the consortium, we are their spiritual home. Sometimes we are their second home. Sometimes we might be their spiritual RV. I don't know. But we are starting to really enjoy these deep, deep looks into different traditions. And so Bob's going to give us one into Buddhism tonight. Dharma Voices for Animals is a nonprofit organization committed to both practicing the teachings of the Buddha, or what's called the Dharma, and to speaking out when the actions of those in Dharma communities and the policies of Dharma centers lead to animal suffering. This is tough work these guys do. DVA wants to be the voice of the animals who cannot speak our language. They speak out about the harm we cause other sentient beings when we eat them, use their body parts as clothing, or use products that are tested on them. While DVA recognizes the challenges of living in a complex modern society, it wishes to promote the choices that provide the greatest reduction of animal suffering. I can get in on that. If you want to keep up with DVA, you can subscribe to their newsletter. And I'll be putting their newsletter right now for everyone in the meeting. There's the sign up. You're going to hear a little bit more about Bob and Bob's qualities and Bob's accomplishments and Bob's personality and all that in a bit from Victoria, but I'm going to introduce you to Victoria first, and then she'll introduce Bob. We like to share around here. Victoria Moran is the Compassion Consortium's only non-clergy co-founder. That tickles me, Victoria. We're going to get her clergy someday, I keep telling her. But she is the Compassion Consortium's only non-clergy co-founder, has a degree in comparative religions, and has practiced yoga for over 50 years. She is the author of 13 books, including Main Street Vegan and Creating a Charmed Life. When she's not hosting the weekly Main Street Vegan podcast, which is excellent, or running Main Street Vegan Academy, I know some of those folks are here tonight, That academy trains vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. When she's not doing all of those things, Victoria is busy writing her next book, Act Like a Yogi.
It's Age Like a Yogi.
Is it Age Like a Yogi? So I am aging like a yogi so well that my readers would like me to act like a yogi. So
we can do both. We can do both.
We will be aging and acting like yogis. So I'm going to hand it right over to Victoria now.
Okay, or we can get some Dharma stuff going on, and we can say, act like a Buddhist, age like a yogi. So Bob Isaacson, oh my goodness, what a person and personage. If you got the newsletter from Compassion Consortium, there was a very detailed bio about Bob, and we're going to ask him some of that stuff too, but I'll just fill you in that Bob Isaacson is president and co-founder of Dharma Voices for Animals. He was a civil rights, human rights attorney for 25 years, specializing in defending people against the death penalty. Shortly after becoming Buddhist 24 years ago, Bob realized the disconnect between the Buddha's teachings of compassion and the practice of those Buddhist teachers and followers who eat animals. This led to Bob's co-founding Dharma Voices for Animals in 2011. It is the only international Buddhist animal advocacy organization in the world. Welcome, Bob Isaacson, to the Compassion Consortium.
Thank you, Victoria. And thank you, Sarah. Kind introduction. I really appreciate that.
Well, we're so happy that you're here, and we're so happy that you got us all to watch this beautiful, beautiful film, Animals and the Buddha. But before we get into the film, and before we even get into the Buddha, I want to hear about you. Your history is so fascinating. So what was it in your earlier life that led you to both Buddhism and veganism? And I'm not even sure which came first.
So I'm not either. Let me think about that. Okay. So first it was vegetarianism. Then it was, first I became a death penalty, human rights, civil rights lawyer. Within a year and a half, I became vegetarian. And then about 20 years later, I became Buddhist. And then a couple of years after that, vegan. So that became vegan about 17, 18 years ago. And then what happened was so I was still practicing law and doing these death penalty cases, first in Chicago for 20 of the years, and then 5 years out here in San Diego. And when I got into the Dharma or the Buddhist teachings, I was exposed to it. I started going on day-long retreats, and I realized I wanted to practice, put my whole self into, actually there is no self, but starting out putting myself into Buddhism. And I decided to retire when I was still in my 40s from being a death penalty lawyer, human rights lawyer. So then the rest of the story is I started going on these retreats, Buddhist retreats, started out Spirit Rock up in Marin County. It's the largest Buddhist center in the US. 50,000 people go there. And I didn't even think of the possibility that Buddhists were not vegetarian. I just assumed that. The food there was vegetarian, it wasn't vegan. Now it's much more vegan. We've been working with them. Until one day, I'll just tell you the quick story. I was with a really well-known Western teacher. He was staying in my home here in San Diego County. And I took him out to buy lunch before he was going out to give a all-day teaching in San Diego. And we came to, it was Sprouts, and time to buy lunch. I bought the salad, picked it out for myself with veggies, and he picked out grilled chicken. And I said, wait a minute, that one has grilled chicken. And then he said, I know. And that's when I realized that all Buddhists, really well-known Buddhist teacher, all Buddhists were not vegetarian. And then I started thinking about this and started talking to teachers, and a couple of people that I didn't know, but I became friends with them, did the same. And we decided after 10 years of futility that we needed to start an organization. And so then Kim Sterla, Patty Brightman, David Blatt and myself became the co-founders of what is now Dharma Voices for Animals.
What a great story and what a wonderful organization. So now let's talk about a wonderful faith tradition. So for those who don't have a lot of familiarity with Buddhism, just give us Buddhism 101, Buddhism for Dummies, the basic fundamentals.
Yeah. So the Buddha's teaching is a teaching of the path, or on the path, for a spiritual awakening, freedom, when we don't suffer anymore. It's really hard for the mind to even get around that. But on the way, it deals with the suffering we're actually experiencing in this moment, today, tomorrow, everything, grief and anxiety, fear, anger, not being with those we want to be with, being with those we don't want to be with. And so we realized through putting the mindfulness is just being present with each moment of experience. We put the mindfulness intentionally on the experience, and by turning our attention to suffering, we actually can transform the suffering. So that's the basic teaching. Actually, our film that we're going to talk about, I know, shortly, talks about that, shines a light on that. So it's a path. The Buddha teaches a path to the end of suffering.
I think that not many Westerners know that. I think that's very new information for most people. And yet there is something that probably anybody on the street would think that they know about Buddhism. If you were to say, are Buddhists vegetarian? You'd get 99 out of 100. Well, of course they are. And in fact, you wrote an article about this in the Lion's Roar, that how does this group get a reputation for something that just isn't happening? So how did they?
So, Victoria, the way it should be is that Buddhists, of course, should be vegetarian. In fact, vegan. I mean, present day embodiment of the teachings of the Buddha. And there are two traditions. I'll be just real brief about this. One is Mahayana. Maybe 70% of the Buddhists in the world. This includes China, Vietnam, Malaysia, etc. Some of the really large, of course, China being the biggest Buddhist countries in the world. And they're, of course, all in Asia. So Mahayana, it's very clear, the Buddha was vegetarian, and he expected his followers to be. Now, this is in the film. But this other branch, or this other tradition of Buddhism, Theravada, which is what I practice, it's Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Myanmar, the three biggest countries practicing it. They have a little more nuanced approach to the Buddhist teachings. And some Theravadan Buddhists, some monastics and lay people are vegetarian. Some are even vegan, but a lot are not. But if you go back to the original teaching and you really give it a fair, and you look at it fairly without trying to find a way to justify eating meat and animal products, it's absolutely clear that if you're practicing Buddhism and the precepts, the moral code or moral conduct of Buddhism, you cannot be compassionate towards a fellow sentient being, one who feels pain. Every animal we eat feels pain. You can't bite into their bodies and chew and swallow and at the same time practice compassion to them. They're obviously incompatible. So this is the challenge in the Buddhist world. So many Buddhists, as you pointed out, are not vegetarian, or not vegan, let alone vegetarian. So this is it. We try to shine a light on the Buddhist teachings. It's really the strongest pro-vegetarian teaching of the major religions in the world. Every sentient being, every being that can feel pain is entitled to our compassion and not to be harmed by us. So we can't eat them. But of course, other Buddhists have excuses and reasons why they're not vegetarian or vegan. And this is where DVA comes in. And we got countrywide projects in the Buddhist countries of Thailand, 60 million Buddhists, 65 rather, Vietnam, 60 million Buddhists, and Sri Lanka, 15 million Buddhists. And of course, in the US, where there are millions of Buddhists.
And it just sounds like the animals need a really good lawyer to reach out to these people. So it's a good thing they've got you. So as we talk about the tradition, let's go back to the beginning. We talked about your history, Bob. Now let's talk about Gautama's history. Let's talk about the Buddha and what he himself had to say about animals and about meat eating.
Okay, so depending on which tradition, Mahayana, just a rough estimate, 70% of the Buddhists, because it includes China. In China, it's thought that it's assumed there are a minimum of 250 million Buddhists. It may be as many as 750 million in the country. But of course, many of the Chinese do not feel comfortable self-identifying as Buddhists. Sometimes the government is supportive. Actually, I was in China for a while, very supportive of Buddhism. Other times, not so supportive. So this I think has a chilling effect on some Buddhists in China. And then you have other countries. So in Mahayana, it is absolutely assumed, and you can see this in our film, and I hope people joining us have watched the film, and it's right there. The Buddha was said to have said to his followers, if there is no eater of meat, there will be no destroyer of life. No eater of meat, that's the translation, no destroyer of life. That's pretty explicit. And he required his followers to be vegetarian. But then in Theravada Buddhism, which is Thailand, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka, also part of Cambodia and Laos, the teachings are less explicit. And there, if you you could, a monk on alms round or a nun on alms rounds, going with a begging bowl. You know, it looks like a bell. I wish I had it here now, but it's a bowl. They go from house to house asking for support so they can eat, and food is put in the alms bowl. So in that situation, the Buddha said, well, if there's a piece of meat in there and you don't even suspect that the animal was killed for you don't even suspect that, no possible way, then you can eat it. So that is so limited. But lay people, there's no exception for lay people, which are 99% of the Buddhists in the world. And when most monks today go out and buy their own food, or the chef in the kitchen in their Buddhist center buy the food. In that case, I don't see how possibly just anyone could justify buying animal products and eating them. So that was the theme of my article called "Friends, Not Food" in The Lion's Roar, and it's really the theme of our film "Animals and the Buddha" by Keegan Kuhn.
Yeah, well, tell us about the film. How did you get from the law business to the film business?
Yeah, so the film actually wasn't my idea. I thought it was a great idea when I heard it, because we wanted to get our message out there. But David Blatt had the idea, and he helped write the script. And then he and I directed the film together. So what better way than to have a film by an amazing world-class filmmaker like Keegan Kuhn? So we started in 2011. And about 2013, we realized we needed some kind of a vehicle to get our message out to Buddhists around the world. So luckily, we found Keegan before he was famous. He was just getting famous, and asked him to do it. And I mean, I'm not going to tell you, but if I did, I'd be embarrassed to tell you how much we paid him to do this film. I mean, it was a total donation on his part, and he worked hundreds and hundreds of hours to put this together. So we helped. By then we had connections. We put Keegan in touch with some of the top monks, nuns, and lay Buddhists in the world. Different traditions, different races, different ethnicity, different Buddhist traditions, and we put together this this portrait of what. Of the moral case and the obvious reason why Buddhists should be not eating animals, should not eat animals.
So what kind of response have you had from the film since it's been available?
It's been great. So we have on YouTube, it's been on YouTube, we have 150,000 views, but I know we've been working with different centers around the world, and a lot of times it's played at a center, so one view, but literally hundreds and even over 1,000 people have watched it. So I'm pretty convinced we've had over 1 million people. We have it translated into 12 major languages, including Chinese and Spanish. And we have, there are subtitles. If you go to the film, I think most of our listeners and viewers wouldn't need this, but there's a wheel there in the right-hand corner. If you click on that, you get to all the subtitle translations. We have every major religion in Asia except Japanese. So if anybody knows someone fluent in Japanese that would help us, we've come close a few times. So this is really important. I had a meeting in 2016 with the Venerable Thich Thanh Huan, who is one of the leading Buddhists in Vietnam. This was set up by a mutual friend. So I'm sitting there. I have actually two interpreters, one on each side of me. He comes into the room where we're meeting, and he starts speaking in Vietnamese, and he thanks me for DVA, for Dharma Voices for Animals, telling me he had just watched our film in Vietnamese. So without those subtitles, and then I eventually invited him to my home. He spent 11 nights here back 4 years ago, and then he became the director of our Vietnamese project. So the film was really the bridge between this guy, I don't speak any Vietnamese, and this amazing monk who is one of 3 Buddhist monks in Vietnam that sets the agenda for 60 million Buddhists in this country. He's been our director for the last 4 years. So cuts across cultural and language barriers.
Wow. And I do hope you find that Japanese translator. I remember learning that what faux meats that are just so big now and making such a difference for veganism were actually invented by Japanese Buddhist monks 1,000 years ago or more. So nothing new under the sun, but lots of good stuff. So in the documentary, as you said, you talk with Buddhist teachers and leaders from around the world. So help us understand, and you did touch on this some, that Buddhists are distributed all over the globe, largely in Asia. Is vegetarianism more prevalent in different parts of, say, the Mahayana world, or are all Mahayana Buddhists vegetarian? Help us understand that.
Yeah, so this, it took me a while to figure this out. And it's really, your question's really important because this determines the strategy of DVA in these countries, in these Buddhist countries or countries where there's a significant minority of Buddhists. I mean, just in a place like Malaysia, there's 10 million Buddhists. It's not a majority of the people. It's basically a Muslim country, but there's millions of Buddhists in Malaysia. So it pays to pay attention to these countries and use some of our resources there. So the Vietnamese monastics, and there are 50,000 in an organization that's led by our venerable director. Every one of them is vegetarian, and almost everyone is vegan. Like our director's been vegan since he's 3 years old, because the monastics take a vow, and the vow is you can't eat animals, and they understand that to mean animal products as well. The Chinese monks, whether they're in Taiwan, we have a wonderful connection with Master Hai Tao in Taiwan, or whether they live in Northern California or in Singapore, where the ethnic Chinese are majority, all of the monastics in the Chinese tradition, all of them, just like the Vietnamese monastics, are vegetarian. And the same thing, the word vegetarian to the Chinese monastics that I've spoken to, usually through translators, absolutely vegan. They don't take any animal products at all. So this is a good start. You can see why we work in Vietnam. Very few Vietnamese lay people are vegetarian. They think it's not healthy, because they hear from the meat and dairy industry. They don't believe that a diet without animal flesh and animal products is healthy. Of course, the exact opposite is true. So our strategy in a place like Vietnam, where we have a volunteer army, literally of 50,000 monastics, but a lay community of 60 million Buddhists who don't think it's good for them and their children to be eating animal flesh and products, we try to work through the monastic community and have as little profile there as we can. We spend money there, resources, we strategize, and I come and people come and they meet me, and it's great. We have events. We had a big AR conference there back in 2018. So that's our strategy, is to try to get people, Buddhists in the countries where there are monks and nuns who practice vegetarianism and veganism. We try to get the lay community to follow. They're called followers, and they're called followers for a reason. That they follow the monastics, they follow the teachings. So then we work with the monastics. But in the Theravadan countries like Thailand, for example, there's 300,000 monastics. Almost all are monks, almost all are men. And they very few of them are vegetarian, and only a handful are vegan. So because they're in the other tradition, the Theravada tradition. So there we really can't use the and work with the monks as a way to reach lay people. We have to first encourage the monks to convert, start bit by bit, become 50% plant-based. And we're doing that right now through presentations. Well, we've had a pause, of course, because of COVID, but we're doing online presentations. We go to the top temples in Thailand and give demonstrations and talks on the nutritional benefit, why you can avoid heart disease and cancer and diabetes, which the Thai monks suffer from in alarming proportion. They're much less healthy than are the lay people. There's all kinds of studies in the country that show that. So we go to them and tell them we are concerned about your health. And I'm particularly concerned about their health because I practice in the Thai and Burmese tradition of Theravada Buddhism. So we're working with them now. We're starting to get their confidence and their trust. And then when they start asking their followers to provide them with healthy food, not animal flesh, then we are very confident the followers will start to convert their diet as well. So that's our strategy in Thailand.
That is absolutely fascinating, and how different that needs to be, and how I love it that you're not saying, well, we'll talk to the friendly, It's like, no, you're going to cover everybody. You reminded me of something, Bob. I was in Tibet in the 1990s, and because our guide abandoned us, we were there with nobody keeping track, and word got around. So we met lots of Tibetans, and they invited us for dinner. But the strange thing would happen in every instance. They would make this huge spread, beautiful food, and then they would leave. And finally, I asked somebody who knows the culture, like, why won't anybody eat with us? And he said, oh, but you're vegan. So they think you're some kind of high spiritual personages that wouldn't eat with ordinary people, which of course was so embarrassing because their spirituality is completely central to their lives. And yet this idea, there's such respect for this, even in a place like Tibet, where it's very, very difficult because of the climate to have vegetables. So I wanted to ask you about your outreach then in one of the countries where Theravada is the tradition, and that I believe is Sri Lanka, where you've done so much with the government.
Yeah. So Thailand is also Theravada, but much different than Sri Lanka. So I'm glad you asked me, because there is a substantial percentage of monastics in Sri Lanka, much smaller country than Thailand, that are vegetarian and vegan. It might have to do with being so close. I think it's only 20 miles off the southern coast of India. And Southern Indians tend to be vegetarian. I'm not sure. There's also Tamil, about 10% of the population. They come from the Tamils come from India. But nonetheless, there's a significant number of monastics and lay Sri Lankans who are who are vegetarian, and there's actually some vegans there as well. They also love Americans. I won't get into it. We don't have the time. But historically, in the 1800s, an American had a huge role, Colonel Olcott from the Civil War, in saving Buddhism in Sri Lanka. It's the longest uninterrupted Buddhism in the world. Sri Lanka is, and Thailand's the second. So we have just a natural connection coming from the U.S. And also with the Theravada Buddhist tradition there. So we have, and then also our a board member for many years, good friend of mine, Bhante Sati, is a Sri Lankan American monk. He came here about 22 years ago. And so he and I worked together to head the project. And he opens doors there, just like the Venerable Thich Thanh Huan opens doors for us in Vietnam. So I'm trusted because I am associated with, because Bhante Sati is our board member. So we've given, I just had it counted today because I had to do a evaluation report for one of the funders, and that we've done 430 presentations. And these are major presentations around Sri Lanka. And as you mentioned, government connection. So we have connection. Bhante Sati is the Dharma teacher for the president of Sri Lanka's wife, who's here in the United States now. We know the prime minister. I was good friends with the former speaker of the parliament in Sri Lanka, Karu Jayasuriya, and they're helping us. We're about ready to pass not an animal rights bill, but an animal welfare bill, which will do a lot, which will save a lot of animals in the country, and it has raised the consciousness of Sri Lankans. And we already have this support of majority of the parliament. So we do work really well in that country, and the press is unbelievable. They cover us. I just got back. I was in Sri Lanka mid-April to mid-May. It was my 9th trip to Asia. This time I didn't go to either Thailand or Vietnam because of COVID restrictions. But in Sri Lanka, 5 of our events were covered on national television, and we had 3 articles in the national press. So, and sometimes in English and sometimes in Sinhala, the national language. So we have amazing connections there. So each country is like totally different in their acceptance of outsiders, of people from the U.S., in their openness to vegetarianism and what the teachings of the Buddhists in their country are, and also in regard to what where the monastic community is. It's totally different. So we have to work our way through those issues. And we really try to work with the monastics when possible.
Well, you might not practice law anymore, but your strategic brain is still at work. So we are going to move now to our Q&A. So if you have a question for Bob, please post that in the chat, and I'll be scrolling up a little bit and see if there are any questions earlier. Also, Bob, if you want to take a look over there now or at some point, there's some very interesting comments. Dr. Ashwani Garg is telling us that Vegan Sri Lanka is very active and has a great Facebook page. Also, Marion Haley Moss has suggested Japanese translators that might be able in short order to get the film into Japanese subtitles, the people from Supreme Master TV. So, questions? And if you really, really want to talk, raise your hand. That's another option. So either type in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. Or we could meditate sooner rather than later.
Do you want me to look for, or you're going to do this?
Yeah, so Matt is asking, can the film be shown for free in public?
Absolutely. There's no copyright on it. So you're welcome to do that, Matt. Just bring a lot of people.
So I had a question too. Buddhism is such a fascinating faith, and the very first thing that you said, that you got yourself to do something, and then you parenthetically said, but there is no self. So tell us a little bit about there being no self.
So like that question would take me a year to answer.
Oh,
But
give it 3
I'll give
minutes.
you a quick, and then you won't understand it anyways, because
Okay.
nobody really understands it. But the simplest way to say this, and I've looked for different ways to say this, because I didn't even mention I'm a lay teacher. I've been practicing now. You said 24. I have to update the website. It's actually about 26 or 27 years. And I've been a lay teacher, a lay Buddhist teacher for about 14 years. I trained up at Spirit Rock to do that in Marin County. So it's that we are much more than who we take ourselves to be. We're much more. And there actually is no separation between ourselves and others. You know, we have there's a way we experience the world as, you know, I'm in here and you're out there. But the actual reality is there is no division. Thich Nhat Hanh, a great Zen master, and probably clearly the most influential vegan Buddhist in the world, who's back in central Vietnam right now. By the way, he was the teacher of the director of our project in Vietnam.
Oh.
He says no separate self, no separate self. So there's a self and experience of our body and thoughts and emotions and all that, but it's not separate. So let me give you an analogy, and that's all I probably should say now. If you go down, so I live really close to the Pacific Ocean. When as the sun goes down out the window there, I can see the Pacific Ocean. When I go down to the beach, I can look at a wave. And if Victoria, went down there with me, you might say, look at that large wave, Bob. And I can see the wave. I know what you're talking about. It's white cap, it's coming in. So, but that wave arises from the ocean and then disappears. It ceases into the ocean. So in a way, the wave is separate from the ocean, but in another way, it's part of the ocean. So that's one way of looking at self, and not no separate self.
I understand that perfectly. I don't know why you thought it was going to be difficult. So Irma has a question. She is asking, how does somebody who's interested in Buddhism get started on the Dharma path?
It's a good question. Where do we know where she is?
Hi, Irma. Do you want to tell us or put in the chat where you are geographically?
Tampa, Florida.
In Florida?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was younger, my parents from Chicago would take me to Florida all the time, mostly southern Florida, get away from the winters. But I'm not so familiar. I know there must be Dharma centers there. So what I would say is get a good book. You can always search the internet. Just put in Buddhism or Buddhist centers, and there are probably hundreds of centers in Florida and in your area. Also, you might check Google Thich Nhat Hanh. So the spelling is a little tricky, but you'll get it if you come close. And I can I'll put it in the chat. And he has sanghas. Thich Nhat Hanh has over 900 sanghas around the world, and that's how I started out. I was in a sangha here, or a group. It's a group of meditators, a group of Buddhist meditators, and he has 900 around the world, and you can find them on his website. It's called Plum Village is the name of the website. So I would get a book, and I can recommend 2 books. First one is Mindfulness in Plain English. Mindfulness in Plain English. And I'm going to tell you it's by Bhante Gunaratana. So Bhante G, as we call him, is in our film like 4 different times. So he's a Sri Lankan American. He's in his 90s now, and he's a concentration expert. He teaches it. His book, Mindfulness in Plain English, is in plain English. It explains everything. It's really a good book. And another book I can recommend is Seeking the Heart of Wisdom. Seeking the Heart of Wisdom by Goldstein and Kornfield.
Thank
Goldstein
you.
and Kornfeld.
And you reminded me of the first Thich Nhat Hanh book I ever read, The Miracle of Mindfulness. And in one place he said that you want to do any activity with the same care as if you were giving the baby Buddha or Jesus a bath. That stayed with me probably 30 years. Okay, Bob, William is asking, in the US, do most Buddhists identify as Mahayana or Theravada or something else? When I attended a Buddhist church on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, it was not clear to me which tradition they follow, although they did serve meat at the post-service lunch, so I assume it was Theravada.
Yeah, it's not, there's no clear answer to what you're saying, except worldwide, there are many more Mahayanan Buddhists than Theravadan Buddhists. And that's because of China, basically, which is a Mahayana country. And the rest, if you take away China, it's pretty balanced. If you put in Myanmar and Thailand and Sri Lanka, Theravadan, and then you put in Vietnam and Singapore and Malaysia and Taiwan, that's Mahayana. So there's a big difference in the different traditions, but a lot of the differences are cultural and national. You go to different countries, they have their own rituals and all. So what I would say is, find a center, a temple or a monastery or a center in your area, and just go there. Listen, sometimes they'll have public Dharma talks, or they might have a day-long retreat or even a multiple day retreat, and just see just take it in without thinking that one tradition is better than the other. So Mahayana is more of a compassion, socially active tradition. Theravada is more just stay with the breath, and this is the direct path to awakening. So different strokes for different folks on this. But you can't go wrong. The basic teachings of the Buddha are expressed in both of the major branches of Buddhism.
Two quick questions. We're supposed to stop right now, but I'm going to be rebellious. Is that the same book as recommended in the film?
No, it's not. So recommended in the film is a book by a good old friend of mine who died about 6 years ago, Norm Phelps. And Norm wrote a book. It is the best book, which is why we recommend it in the film. The best book on the intersection of Buddhism and animal rights. In fact, his book is called The Great Compassion, Buddhism and Animal Rights. That's what he calls the book. And the book's about 200 pages. First third of it is all about animal suffering. It's the place to start. The next part is what the reality is in the practice of Buddhism, about it's all about vegetarianism. And the third is what you can do about it. So I really recommend that book for those of us, and I assume if you're on the call, you're interested in this, the question of animals and the suffering of animals, and the involvement of the Buddhist community and all communities in the suffering of animals by eating them and eating their products. So this is a wonderful book. Norm would have been on our board of directors, but he was ill at the end of his life for a while, and wasn't able. He mostly advised me. He was kind of my mentor for a long time. But I highly recommend Norm's book. It's really outstanding.
Okay, so finally, very last question. We do need to keep this really short. What are the excuses Buddhists are giving for not being vegan or plant-based?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Another good one, Victoria. This is actually the theme of my article. Friends, not food. And the first one, the most common one is I don't kill the animal, so it's okay to eat the animal. And so the explicit teachings of the Buddha not in Mahayana, where the Buddha was vegetarian and expected his followers to be, but in Theravada Buddhism, explicit teaching is to not kill, or sometimes interpreted as to not cause harm to a sentient being. All the animals we eat are sentient beings. They all feel pain. So they'll say, well, I didn't kill the animal, or I didn't harm the animal. It just happened to be slaughtered and I ate it. But as I point out in the article, and this is the major theme of DVA. If you weren't eating the animal wouldn't be killed. And so the Buddha didn't limit his teaching on non-harming and non-killing to just those that do the actual killing, but he extended it to those who facilitate and who are part of the killing process. I can't think of a more direct example of being part of the killing process than biting into the flesh, chewing and swallowing the flesh of a sentient being, a being that wants to live as much as we do, and experiences fear just like we do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Bob, you were kind enough to say that you would close us out with a Buddhist compassion meditation. So, yeah, and that will take us into Reverend Sarah's close. So thank you so much for this. And now let us all be Buddhists for a few minutes.
You're welcome. So let me just spend just a few moments explaining. So the Buddha taught, in addition to mindfulness, he also taught the what's called the 4 Brahma Viharas. So these are ways to incline the heart and mind towards wholesome emotions and mind states. And the compassion, or karuna, Karuna, it's the Pali word when the teachings were first translated in ancient language. Karuna is one of the 4 practices. It's compassion. And so, although I've never heard at a Buddhist center in the US or in Asia, a compassion for animals that actually is directed towards their suffering because we eat them. So that's what I'm going to direct us now, just to acknowledge what happens to animals and all of the billions of animals, I'm sure, in the world that are eaten by Buddhists. So this is just a way to express our compassion, our being one with their suffering. So if I may, I would suggest you close your eyes, but you don't have to do that. And if you can, or if you'd like, you get in the meditative position. You could sit on a floor, a cushion, just sit where you are on a chair, it's fine. You can even do standing meditation if that's more comfortable for your back. So just find a comfortable position. And if you like, close your eyes. I sit with my eyes closed when I meditate. So just bringing to mind the suffering of farmed animals, like what must it be like to go from a factory farm where animals are raised for slaughter to the slaughterhouse, and then to our plates once the slaughter has happened. So you can repeat this after me to yourself. May I hold your suffering with compassion. May I hold your suffering with compassion. And as I say these words, you might want to repeat them to yourself, if you like. May I hold your suffering with compassion. And just repeat that phrase to yourself a few more times, please. May I hold your fear with compassion. This is our expression of compassion for farmed animals. May I hold your fear with compassion. May I hold your fear with compassion. May you be free from suffering. All the farmed animals in the world, may you be free from suffering. May you be free from suffering. May all beings be free from suffering. Thank you. I should have my meditation bell, but I don't have it. thank you for participating with me in this compassion practice. And Victoria, thank you, and William and Sarah, thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to meet a bunch of people and share Dharma Voices for Animals and our vision with so many people. I'm really pleased to do that. And please go to our website. Sarah mentioned it, and just sign up for our newsletter. It's just Dharma Voices for Animals. And then right on our homepage, you'll see at the top tab, newsletter, also on the sidebar, you'll see it. Just sign up and follow what we're doing and see we have a lot of opportunities. We're doing lots of interesting things. If you just want to stay on top of what DVA is doing, we're the only international Buddhist animal advocacy organization in the world. So anyways, thanks very much for having me.
Bob, thank you so much for sharing generously of your time. Charles, for also being here, for all of the folks at Dharma Voices for Animals and all the other organizations who have shown up tonight. It's really been a pleasure to practice with and to learn from and to radiate compassion out from where we are here. The work that we are all doing sometimes can be heavy-hearted, and these moments of sharing with each other can bring community, can bring compassion to ourselves and compassion to others as we're bringing compassion to the beings that we're working so very, very hard for. So I had a little closing prayer that we had prepared, but I think maybe we'll end with just saying again the beautiful words that Bob shared us with. And I'm just going to do a we version of that. Invite you to take a deep breath. May we hold all suffering with compassion. May we hold all fear with compassion. May all beings be free from suffering. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Have a good night wherever you are, whatever you're doing. If you've got companion animals over there, please give them a pat. Good night, folks.